The world woke up today to a wave of breaking news that's sending shockwaves through every corner of the geopolitical map. A story that, could reshape power equations across continents. At the heart of it lies India.com's strategic. And yet again proving that its global influence is no longer emerging. It's already arrived. Behind the scenes of closed-door diplomacy, military modernization, and energy realignments, a new India is quietly drawing the lines of a future world order, one where it isn't just a participant, but a major architect. What's happening now is not a coincidence. It's the outcome of years of planning, tactical patience, and precise timing. Every move that New Delhi makes today, from trade to technology, defense to diplomacy, is calculated to strengthen its hand on the global chessboard. And while other nations debate, India acts. That's what's making this story so explosive, and why everyone from Washington to Beijing to Moscow is watching closely. It started with whispers, closed talks between top Indian and Middle Eastern officials, late-night calls between Washington and New Delhi, and an unusual uptick in visits from global defense executives to India's capital. On the surface, it looks like normal diplomacy. But the real story is buried beneath the surface. India is about to announce a game-changing trilateral pact that could reshape global trade routes and energy security. The new corridor will directly challenge China's Belt and Road Initiative, creating an alternative trade and energy pipeline that connects India, the Middle East, and Europe. For years, Beijing's BRI has dominated headlines. But now India, backed by strategic partnerships with the US, France, and Gulf allies, is turning the tables. The proposed Corridor 1T just be an economic route. It'll be a declaration of independence from China's global influence, a subtle yet powerful signal that the world's future will not be written by one superpower alone. At the same time, India's defense modernization is quietly entering its most aggressive phase ever. Reports from defense insiders confirm that India's new generation missile defense systems, indigenous drones, and naval expansion are ahead of schedule. The Indian Navy's presence in the Indo-Pacific is growing faster than analysts predicted. This is not about intimidation, it's about deterrence. As one retired admiral recently said, India is ensuring that no one can dictate terms in its backyard. That statement sums up the new doctrine: peace through power. And as these developments unfold, something else is happening. Global investors are rushing to India. Not just because of the world's largest population or growing markets, but because India is becoming the world's stability anchor. Amid wars, sanctions, and economic collapses elsewhere, India's steady hand is attracting record foreign direct investment. Multinationals that once looked to China as their manufacturing base are now setting up in Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Maharashtra. Even tech giants are shifting major operations here. What we're seeing is not random. It's the economic counterpart to India's geopolitical rise. But perhaps the most dramatic part of this story lies in New Delhi's growing leverage in Washington. Behind every public statement about friendship and shared values, there's intense negotiation, from defense procurement to semiconductor deals to space collaboration. India knows exactly how far it can go and how much the US needs it. American officials may talk about democracy and shared vision, but the truth is simpler. The US cannot counter China in Asia without India. That gives New Delhi unprecedented leverage. Every handshake, every trade agreement, every joint statement, they're all part of a carefully designed long game. The world is noticing. European capitals that once viewed India merely as a developing democracy now see it as an indispensable global actor. In Brussels, policy analysts are calling it India's strategic decade. Even Russia, despite the Ukraine conflict, continues to hold India as a crucial partner, not an ally but a reliable balancing force that keeps the world multipolar. India's ability to talk to everyone, Washington, Moscow, Tehran, and even Beijing, without taking sides, is its biggest strength. In a polarized world, India is the one player that can talk peace without appearing weak and negotiate deals without appearing desperate. Now let's talk about what's fueling India's rise: energy independence. With global oil politics constantly shifting, India's moves in this space are revolutionary. It's building long-term energy alliances that bypass traditional Western-led systems. It's from buying discounted Russian oil to exploring joint renewable projects with the Gulf and Africa. India is creating a new hybrid model, one where no single supplier can hold it hostage. The irony: same Western nations that once criticized India's oil diplomacy now depend on India's refined fuel exports to stabilize their own markets. In other words, the world's fuel chain now runs through Indian ports, and everyone knows it. But behind every diplomatic handshake, there's also a silent battle, one fought through data, technology, and influence. India's entry into the AI and semiconductor race has put it in direct competition with the biggest players. Silicon Valley is already moving to secure Indian partnerships, while Washington fast-tracks export permissions for dual-use technologies. The Indian government's Make in India for the World initiative is no longer just a slogan. It's a blueprint for economic sovereignty. Every microchip produced, every AI startup funded, every defense drone tested, they all feed into a larger strategy, ensuring that the 21st century isn't dominated by foreign dependence, but by Indian innovation. Meanwhile, India's diplomatic approach is becoming a global case study. Unlike the loud megaphone politics of the West or the aggressive posturing of some Asian powers, India practices quiet assertiveness. It doesn't shout, it calculates. It doesn't threaten, it negotiates. But when it does act, it leaves an impact that lasts. The recent border talks with China are a perfect example. No fireworks, no headlines, but steady pressure and smart leverage have forced Beijing to acknowledge that India cannot be cornered. In the South Asian neighborhood, too, India's influence is resurging from Nepal to Sri Lanka to the Maldives. Nations are recalibrating their ties toward New Delhi once again. The reason is simple. India offers partnership, not dominance. As this story continues to develop, the most astonishing thing is how fast the perception of India has changed globally. A decade ago, headlines in Western media questioned whether India could lead. Today, the same outlets run cover stories calling it the world's next superpower. But power doesn't come from praise. It comes from choices. And India's choices have been strategic, not emotional. It's building alliances based on interests, not ideology. It's trading where it benefits, defending where it must, and speaking when it matters. That's why India's global credibility is growing faster than its GDP. And perhaps the most underrated element in all of this is timing. The global order is in flux. Wars in Europe, economic strain in the US, political chaos in the Middle East, and a slowing China. In that instability, India's rise appears even more steady, even more credible. It's as the only major power managing to maintain relations with both East and West without paying a diplomatic cost. That's not luck, it's design. New Delhi's foreign policy architects understand that the world isn't divided into friends and enemies anymore. It's divided into those who adapt and those who dan. NT and India has chosen adaptation as its weapon. The next phase will be even more interesting. Insiders suggest that New Delhi is preparing to host a global summit that will include nations from Africa, Latin America, and the Indo-Pacific, the first serious attempt to create a new alignment of the global South independent of Western influence. This could be the most significant diplomatic shift in decades, a coalition not led by ideology, but by development and equality. If it succeeds, it could mark the beginning of a new power bloc, with India at its center. But what truly makes this moment historic is how India has achieved all of this without abandoning its democratic foundation. In a world where many powers rely on coercion and censorship, India's strength lies in its complexity. 1 billion voices, it's 1 billion debates, and yet a unified national ambition. That paradox, diversity within strength, is what makes India's rise different from any other in history. So, as the world adjusts to this new reality, one truth is becoming clear: geopolitics will never be the same again. The unipolar world is gone, and the bipolar world is fading. What's emerging is a multipolar, multidimensional order, and at its center stands India.com, assertive and unshakably confident. The next decade won't just be India's story. It will be the world's transformation, written in New Delhi's language of balance, independence, and vision. And when the dust of history settles, this era will be remembered as the moment when India stopped being a balancing power and became the power that defined the balance.